Welcome to the latest episode of Celtics Rundown. I'm Bobby Krivitsky, and joining me today, it's kind of my twin in a way, another Bobby from Syracuse University. Go Orange. Shout out to the Newhouse Mafia. Bob, first off, thank you for taking the time. How you doing today?
Good. I'm wearing some orange.
Love
We
it.
can't be near each other because if anyone says Bobby, we don't know who they're talking to. It's great. And I always love meeting another Bobby. I don't know if you feel the same way, but you don't always meet them everywhere you go every day. So when you do meet one, you're like, what's up, Bobby?
Well, that's the thing. There's not a lot of us, so it's kind of a rarity. Definitely a delight. And then on the beat, I call you Bob just, to give it something different. But then there is also Bob Schron on the beat. So
Yep.
we are well represented here covering the Celtics.
Someone's going to have to go Robert at some point, which I'm not opposed to, but not yet.
Yeah, I've always been against that since I can remember in preschool being like, I'm not a Robert. So I might resist that, but at some Bob Schron for now, that can be him. At some point, we'll see. We'll see what happens down the line. Maybe we'll have like a one-on-one game to determine it.
I'm with it. I'm with it.
So let's get into it. Celtics, Knicks. We're gonna go heavy on our takeaways from this game because there's so much to unpack from what unfolded and then what it means for the greater picture. The most obvious, Bobby, is that the Knicks are not on the Celtics level. They're not on the same plateau as the top tier teams in the league, who they're now 0-7 against on Friday. They had a 37-point beatdown suffered at the hands of the Cavs. And out of 144 minutes in their 3 games against Boston, do you know how long they've led for in total?
5 minutes, maybe.
Can I tell you this? You're actually being way too generous to them.
Yeah.
New York, out of 144 minutes, they've led for 50 seconds, less than 1 minute.
No way. Yeah, because they had that push in the third quarter in the MSG game, but then Tatum just took it over at that point, and it was a similar kind of game in this latest one where the Knicks owned the third quarter. It extended a little bit into the fourth, and you're like, all right, this is about to be a game. And then Tatum just put his foot on the gas again and took the game over. So it shocks me, Bobby, just talking about it the last day and a half, that the Knicks can't even keep it close. They can't even take a lead in this series for more than 50 seconds, as you said there. I never expected that they were going to beat the Celtics this year or be this major threat to them. But the fact that they can't even stay in a single game against them is stunning to me, because they're good enough to stay in a game. They're good enough to win a game in a series, but as it stands with how both teams look right now, you could see it being a sweep the way it's been played so far.
Well, so this is the issue. And at first, when Towns is going, I know he's from New Jersey, but home, relatively speaking, to New York, I was really excited from a Knicks perspective about that acquisition. And you say, wow, that's on the heels of getting Mikal Bridges earlier in the summer. But then when you have more time to marinate on it, I started thinking going into opening night, and they're going to have Brunson and Towns in their closing lineup. And not every team can do this, but the Celtics in particular are going to look at that like it's lunch meat. So I've been saying that since going into that first game of the season, and then it unfolds that way. And I remember telling people that night, I don't want to overreact to one game, especially not the first. And this Knicks team needs time to gel, whereas the Celtics just had a whole championship run together. But at the same time, I don't know how much better it can get for them when those two are on the floor. You talk about Tatum's dominance and just taking it to another level. I mean, we all know that Joe Mazzulla loves to refer to it as their orca whales hunting seals. When you have an undersized point guard and a big that moves his feet slowly, so he's in drop coverage, and even when he dares to come up anywhere near the level of a screen with Tatum coming downhill, those are prime examples. Like, that's as seal as it gets.
Yeah, and the Celtics are at their best against teams that have to react, that have to help, that get beat by that first line of defense there. And you saw it in that game. The 5-6 pass possessions where you're most impressed by Boston, they came in droves in this game. And you don't always see them because teams are going to try to switch them. Teams are going to try to stay out of rotation, all that. So the fact that they were able to beat their defenders off the dribble so consistently in this game. Even the better ones like OG, Tatum took advantage of him at times. Bridges wasn't able to slow anybody. Jalen, after a slow start, got going opposite of Jason. So there's just mismatches everywhere. And when it's those point of attack guys, Brunson, who's probably going to be the one who's hunted most often, and then Towns, who's going to have to guard the pick and roll at that 5 spot, it just gives you limitless opportunities as an offense. And the Celtics, that's about as seamless of a performance on both ends. And their defense deserves credit, too, for slowing the Knicks in the game as well. It's about as good as I've seen them look this year. And it's brought the best out of them, too, this matchup every time. The opening night shooting, the third quarter push in that second game, and then the first half in this game, they were just levels above New York. And on New York's end, does Mitchell Robinson help? Does he change everything? It's just not a guy or a caliber of player that you look at and say, everything's going to change when this guy comes back. He'll help, but he's not going to change this matchup entirely.
Yeah, he'll help at the rim and on the glass to extend possessions, and that can allow them to play at their pace a little more. But at the same time, it's another drop big, and Tatum is as good as it gets when you put the 5 in the pick and roll, and whether it's you get him switched or in drop coverage like this, he tends to pick it apart. And Towns is just lunch meat out there. Mitchell Robinson, I think they look at him like a seal as well in that matchup where he's going to drop back and give Tatum momentum coming downhill to step into a 3 or get into the paint and make something happen. At a minimum, they're probably bringing a help defender over. The Celtics, I thought they did a great job because they saw in New York that the Knicks sometimes would have Brunson be that help defender to try and swipe at the ball and slow down Tatum on the drive. So at times, Boston had Hauser pick him off. And even at times, there's one that I highlighted on Twitter today where he was able to get in Brunson and Towns' way. Tatum gets an easy layup. So I think the Celtics they're just on a different level than New York can get to. I think the same applies to the Thunder and the Cavs as well against New York. And you mentioned Anunoby and Bridges, because those are the two main pieces that the Knicks brought in with the Celtics in mind and having to go through Boston. Well, OG Anunoby is yet to score 15 points in a regular season game against the Celtics. And then I retweeted this from Tommy Beard today, who now has his own Substack that everyone should check out over at Knicks Centric. Mikal Bridges, you ready for this? As the primary defender on Jason Tatum this season, in 68.6 possessions, Tatum is shooting over 61% from the field. He's 4 of 7 from 3, so that's 57%. It's his highest field goal percentage against any player who's guarded him at least 60 possessions this season. And for good measure, Tatum has 7 assists and no turnovers when Bridges is his primary defender. So you can look at what the Knicks gave up to get Towns, but this is the guy, Bridges, that they cashed in their chips for. He's a 28-year-old zero-time All-Star, and the guy that he was primarily brought in to defend is working him every time they match up.
Yeah, and he plays so many minutes, too. I think that's another problem for that Knicks team is the depth isn't there, so you have to push those guys so far and so long in the games. You had one stretch in that game where it's like Landry Shamet and Cam Payne and some other guys mixed in there, but it's mostly guys like Bridges going 38 minutes and pretty much all of these games, sometimes more. So I don't think that helps with their consistency. But those guys, OG and Bridges specifically, against the Celtics, you have to execute offensively. And they were so bad early in that game at keeping up scoring with Boston. Like, that's how they're going to have to stay in these games because they don't have great defensive personnel. And no matter what they do, they're probably going to be giving up a little bit on that end. So you have to be great offensively. And those guys just haven't been consistently enough for New York, at least against Boston. And the Bridges thing's interesting. I was talking to one of their beat guys last night, James Edwards, and it's like, would you reverse any of those trades? And it's tough because I feel like they all dominoed into each other in a way. And you had to, at least for the Towns trade, do everything that you did before to get that done. And I still think you do the Towns trade looking back on it. But Bridges is the one, was he the right guy for all you gave up? For the role he's playing in, where he's not on the ball much, where he's not creating much, where he's not doing what he did at times in Brooklyn and Phoenix. He's just sort of cast to the side, and he's not shooting well from 3 this year. And so in a game like this, he wasn't doing much of anything offensively. And that's what you have to do to keep the Celtics at bay, because every time the Celtics got a stop or forced a turnover or just held the Knicks off the board, the Celtics were running the other way. And that's where it got so ugly for me, Bobby, is they were getting torched in transition. And that's when that game really got out of hand. So the Bridges thing, to me, it's like, would you have gone back and traded for someone different? I don't know who that would be specifically, or would you have just kept on to those picks and been patient? Because now you're stuck. This is your roster. And if it's not a good fit together, or it's not deep enough, or whatever problems we nitpick here, there's nothing they can do to change that, really.
That's the thing, is that I don't like speaking in definitive terms about the future. I mean, who saw Luka Doncic go into the Lakers, especially for the price that, it cost the LA to acquire him. But at the same time, 5 first-round picks for a 0-time All-Star. The way that I look at it is that New York is very good. They're very fun to watch, and it's a great group to root for. Like, I genuinely enjoy that team and that unit that they have, and the Villanova thing and all that. At the same time, it does feel like their ceiling is established, and I don't see the pivot coming or how they might spin this into leveling up. So I feel like this is a team where they are who they are. They're going to be good. They're going to be competitive. They're going to be enjoyable, but there's probably no Larry O'Brien trophies in this unit's future.
Yeah. So I guess what you can say is, with the 0-7 against Boston, Oklahoma City, and Cleveland that everyone's talking about here, they're 37-13 against everybody else. So this stretch coming up, it's Philly, it's Memphis, Miami. There's some manageable games in there, some tough West Coast games, but they'll take care of business elsewhere. What they need is that Robinson return to make an impact, and it should make some impact if he can stay healthy and if he can be who he was before. And then you need a break. So, it's been a lot of nightmare scenario talk for the Knicks the last couple of days here because they lost so badly to Cleveland and Boston, but it's still been a pretty good year for them. It's still been a fun team to watch, and overall they've been successful this year. It's just that they don't stack up to that top level there, and that's always a tough spot to be in as a team where you're having fun, you're doing great, but you're not in that championship caliber, as you mentioned there, and it's just going to take these guys playing better, all of them across the board. For them to be able to at least compete. And that's where it starts. Maybe you get some injury luck. Maybe you get a break there. But the tough part for them is they're pretty much locked in at 3. I'd say Boston's locked in at 2 at this point, given what Cleveland's doing. So these teams, it feels inevitable at this point, will meet in that second round. And especially with home court in Boston's favor there, it's not looking good for the Knicks getting by them.
Yeah, they've lost by an average of 20 points to those 3 teams you mentioned there, Celtics, Cavs, and Thunder. And it seemed like a group yesterday that was searching for optimism. It was almost like a fake it till you make it sort of deal in how they were talking. And, Josh Hart told you the quote where at the end he said, but we've just got to be better. We got to step up. And so I don't know if that's realistic, but that's kind of where they're at right now. And then to their credit, in the first half, there were times where they looked like their confidence had taken a hit, which is understandable. And then in that third quarter, they go on this 39-25 run. What did you see in that period?
They sped up. They got out on the run. They pushed the pace. They piled up some stops finally. The Celtics definitely just missed some shots in there, but they also forced turnovers, which if you can do that against Boston, that's where you start breaking a door open for some opportunity. It's tough to do. Obviously, the Celtics have been one of the lower turnover rate teams in the league the last couple of years. So that all looked good. I thought Towns' motor went up too. I mean, he's so important for them. He's at least competing defensively and on the offensive end, able to shoulder a load. That's going to be able to generate a lot of offensive momentum for them. And the tough part for him is that the Celtics just dare him to drive a lot of the time. So he ends up playing in traffic. He ends up taking difficult shots in the lane at that point. He only took 1 3-pointer in the first half, I think. So him getting going, getting more aggressive, battling inside, playing through contact, all that stuff, I feel like, along with Brunson's runs and transitions and big threes. I mean, he scored like 15 points in 5 minutes in the third there. That got them going. They got to get up more threes, though. And that's where they're at a huge disadvantage against Boston, is they're not a team that shoots a ton of threes. They're a team that likes to shoot those in-between floaters, tough shots in the lane. And you could just see the Celtics. Obviously, Towns fell into that. Brunson, Hart was in that zone early. They took tough shots outside the restricted zone in the paint there, and it just led to them being super inefficient. They were shooting 33% at halftime. So after half, you get on the run, you create some better opportunities for yourself. You play with pace. That kept it competitive, but when you go down 27, that run's going to stop at some point. And for them, they were like 4 points short.
Yeah, I mean, the Knicks had one more shot than the Celtics in total, but 8 fewer threes. And when you lose the math equation to a team that's better than you that decisively, you're probably not going to win. And the other key there, because you mentioned the turnovers from Boston and how that helped the Knicks be able to play at a faster tempo. And then all of a sudden, Towns has a great third quarter and Brunson gets going and has a burst. And, you mentioned earlier that Campaign was hitting shots for them. But to me, a glaring part of the equation, I asked Jason Tatum about this after the game, was Jalen Brunson, no free throws. The job that the Celtics did in limiting them to one shot per possession, protecting the perimeter, and overall, outside of that third quarter burst, taking care of the ball, that's what cut off New York's water and made it to where not only do the Celtics have these seals to target on defense, but any avenue that the Knicks had to be able to build off of getting it to 4, it immediately got cut off.
Yeah, and Missoula is so attentive to all that stuff, as we know. For me, and I know Knicks fans are getting on Tibbs right now, and maybe rightfully so for the minutes, and Towns came back to the game after he got hurt, and there's a million different things you can probably nitpick with him. But the biggest thing is that I don't know what their ideal game plan is against Boston. Like, what are they trying to do? What are they prioritizing? What are they trying to take away? It didn't feel like they took away anything from the Celtics in this one. And, Boston's trying to control the boards and limit those turnovers, as you said, and win that 3-point margin. And I look at New York and what they're doing, and I like the way their offense flows sometimes. Like, they have a nice handoff game. They, have Towns in that pick and pop. Brunson can get downhill and get the ball popping. But I don't really see what their vision is for how they're going to beat Boston. Like, some teams are just going to take Tatum out of the game and not let him be a threat at all. Some teams are going to try to switch and play him one-on-one and not let the other guys get going. And I feel like they gave up everything. Like they gave up Tatum baskets. They gave up the Pritchard shots. Jalen got going on the move at a certain point. They weren't taking away transition. And so when it's that bad, and I'm actually really surprised they went on that third quarter run, because to me, late in the second, when it started really getting away from them, I was like, is this team still playing for their coach? Is this team still bought into what they're doing there? And I guess the fact that they answered the call there in the third and got back in it and did some good things is a sign that there's some life. But it just didn't look right to me from a coaching matchup, game plan perspective, the two sides and what they were doing. Because the Celtics, by their end of things, they look like they've locked in on this team and keyed in and know their tendencies. And this is like a team they've studied extensively, because they're not able to study every team extensively throughout the year. But this division team that you're playing and might see in the playoffs, they probably spend a little more time on. And they just seemed all over everything that the Knicks want to do. The free throw thing you mentioned, Towns' pick and pop game, even some of the double teams that they threw at them in that game were really like concise and well timed and forced turnovers and just completely threw off the Knicks. So the coaching matchup here to me is completely lopsided right now, the way these 3 games have gone too.
Yeah, I thought the job that Tatum did on Towns when he was guarding him, and
Oh
then
yeah,
the
that
attention,
set the tone for the game.
without a doubt. And we're going to get into Tatum right now, because you also mentioned, hey, it's kind of a pick your poison situation for teams. Are we trying to take him away as a scorer, or are we trying to live with that? Right. But it feels like so often, Bob, we watch teams go with, we're going to make Tatum beat us as a facilitator, and they stick with that as he's just torturing them. And it's the other Celtics going off because he's setting the table.
Yeah, and he's so advanced with it at this point. I thought the play of the game was him slowing it down in transition and hitting Pritchard for that skip pass when the Knicks got within like 3, 4, 6 or something like that at that point. So he can torch you up with the passing, and he's looking for it too. Like, guys will come in from the corner and he'll just be ready to fire the ball out to Horford or whoever's standing there. When there's a double team coming, he gets off of it quickly at this point. And the big assist games are stacking up at this point, even through some big scoring nights too. So he's able to do it even in tandem with his 30, 40-point games. So he almost had a triple-double again in this one. Every game you're seeing him just get a little bit better with moving the ball while also limiting the turnovers. And you just want to see it run through him for as much as possible. And I've been looking at that Brown Tatum rotation thing for this year, and obviously Brown missed a couple games before the break, so Tatum was able to play the full first and the full third, and sometimes they were even extending that third quarter stretch into the fourth. And he just gained so much rhythm, so much confidence through those stretches. He's able to feel the game out. And when Brown came back after the break, they kept doing that. And that's what I think had Tatum in a great place before the break. Now, what does that mean for Brown? I think it's just like last year. He has to get in where he can fit in, because Tatum's playmaking at this point is so good and so important that he needs to be out there for as much and for as long as possible. And, cutting off his legs by taking him out midway through the first or midway through the third before he can even fully get going, I think is a mistake at this point. So it's tough for Brown, who had that role in the past of starting games and setting tones and being able to make plays and stuff. But I liked how Brown responded in this game. The start of the fourth there, where they got the lead back to double digits. I know a lot of it was Derek White, but Brown was making some plays there too. And he was able to lead them through that stretch without Tatum for a good 5 minutes there. So I like that balance that they have to start here. And I think getting Tatum back into his old rotation has gotten him back to that MVP level play we've seen from him over the last 5-10 games.
Yeah, because we can see that Tatum loves to be able to sort of feel his way out into the game. And again, he tends to start with facilitating. And that's how I think he finds a rhythm for himself while knowing he's getting everyone else involved and in a good place.
Yeah, he started this game 0-4. He wasn't scoring big time out of the gate.
Well, and we saw that in particular, that expression of emotion when he hits the three right before the end of the first half, where he does the double bang on the chest and lets out a scream. It's the first made three that he had at that point. So you can see it there and how he likes to operate. And then finally one goes in. Not that he missed that many threes, but I just think he's at a point where he's improved every year when it comes to orchestrating the offense. And he's been at a high level for years now while doing that. So to continue to elevate has reached a point where last year, one of the talking points for why someone might favor the Nuggets over the Celtics is, well, it feels like Denver gets a good shot every time down the floor thanks to Jokic. So in the crunch time, whose offense do you have more trusted? But now you can at least say the same about Tatum, whether it's he gets doubled, gets the ball out quickly, like you said, and he sets them up to get something good, or he just directly creates it. So it feels like when he's running the offense, the Celtics are getting a good shot or they're in position to every time down the floor.
Yeah, and you have more confidence in them in crunch time, but where you can, just forget crunch time. And they almost did some crunch time level execution early in the fourth there without him. And then you can sit guys down. Not that they did in that game, but in other spots recently, they've been able to end games before the fourth quarters. And that's another reason I like Tatum playing the full third is if you go on a big run before the fourth, that game could be over pretty early into the fourth. And I still generally prefer, just from the kind of team that they are and pace and all of that, like they can slow down into crunch time sometimes. They can be prone to some mistakes and turnovers in those situations. End the game before the final 5 minutes and get your guys some rest. Keep doubt out of the game. Don't give the other team a chance to be able to get back in it. And I think that's the perfect formula for them down the stretch. I know we just got the injury report for tomorrow, and there is some rest coming for Holiday. And, Horford's going to get his usual back-to-back night off, it looks like here. But the best rest you can get, guys, is when you're up 25 a couple minutes into the fourth and everyone can just take a seat. And that's what they did all last year and for the start of this year. And then once things got funky into January, they were losing games and playing tight games. And, that adds some minutes on the Tatum, Bobby. And I'm not the minutes police, But I do sometimes sit there and go, oh man, he's played 21 straight minutes. This is an idea. Like, remember that Miami game before the break? He just stayed in that game and they were up 20 deep into the fourth and he's still out there. And I know the break's coming, but come on, this game's over.
Can I tell you something? I think that we're almost like, because I wouldn't describe myself as minutes police either, but almost like retired detectives on that beat where you're still monitoring and paying attention to it. And you can't help but feel some type of way in an example like that Miami game. We're like, did he need to be out there that late into the game and rack up this many minutes? So that's definitely what it feels like. And then also what we were robbed of yesterday, credit to the Knicks for that third quarter response. But at the same time, that was supposed to be a fourth quarter filled with Torrey Craig and Jordan Walsh and the guys at the end of the bench. That was supposed to be the stay ready group's time to shine.
Yep, Shireman, he was in town. So yeah, you want to put games away sooner, and I don't blame them for the third quarter. It's gonna go against you sometimes when you're up big, and they were up so big so early that you almost expect it in circumstances like those. So the fact that they respond, and it got a little too close for comfort there, but the fact that they responded so definitively and put the game out of reach quickly at that point. I mean, they were up 11 just 4 or 5 minutes into the fourth. I liked it. I liked the execution there. And Derek White's been so important too, as he's gotten going recently. It just reminds you how important he is and how much they miss him when he's not himself or he's out of the game. And he just made the most important plays of the game alongside that Pritchard three. And, the alley-oop to Porzingis I thought was massive. His back-to-back threes there that gave them the breathing room before that play. He's just perfect when he's at his best. And it's just that extra layer. And you mentioned Josh Hart's quote earlier. He just starts rattling off the names that you have to account for. And Tatum so much already and Brown so much. But then you get into the Pritchards and the Whites and all that. And all these guys can create their own shot. And when you look at their Celtics roster and compare it to the Knicks, where maybe Bridges can produce his own shot at a decent rate, Towns a little bit, but it's really just all Brunson. And so you can key in on a guy like that and try to take him out of the game, and the Celtics did. You can't do that for Boston, because if there's too much attention on one guy, someone else is going to beat you there. And, what did Pritchard score? 28 in Philly? That's your sixth option, maybe fifth or sixth. It's crazy right now. And this team, I had some concerns, Bobby, in January. I really didn't like the way they looked. But I think now we're seeing it was probably health. It was probably the starters not having as many minutes together. It was probably them trying to figure out their rotations and everything they wanted to do. And what we saw on Sunday was them finally doing exactly what they want to do and having it laid out with the double bigs and the rotations and Tatum and everything else that we talked about here. So as long as they're healthy here the rest of the way, and there's not much regular season left, this feels like what we're going to watch. These blowouts, these dominant wins, even against some tough competition here. And I'm glad, we'll see the Lakers next week. We'll see Denver on Sunday. I'm looking forward to these Western Conference matchups, because at this point, I respect Cleveland, but I still wouldn't pick them to beat Boston.
Yeah, you could hear the disrespect on the undertone of that statement there. But I'm with you, and the Celtics, top seed or not, are still the favorites in that matchup. They're still the more talented team. And, I really like this iteration of the Cavs and getting Hunter. They've needed a wing for so long. That helps.
Yep.
It was a nice win for them yesterday as well.
They'll be here Friday. I forgot to mention them. Yeah.
I know. I can't wait for that. And that Celtics-Lakers game has a whole different vibe now. And I'm glad that this one's at the Garden with Luka here. And then, to hear Josh Hart rattling off the names to you, and he's already listed all the starters, and he gets to Peyton Pritchard and is just exasperated at that point. And it's like, you can't do anything if you're him but laugh. I found that to be hilarious.
Yeah, and they, they're still trying to project that optimism, but that's the kind of quote you say after you lost the series, and it's like, oh man, can you believe how good those guys are? And they already did lose the season series, but they're probably going to meet again. Like, who's at the bottom side of those matchups? Detroit, and for the Celtics right now, a 2-7 would be like Orlando or Miami. Those would be relatively tough first round series, but not ones you're going to lose unless there's injuries or something like that. So I'm not going to
I mean,
completely write off the Knicks being competitive. Like, there's been moments in these games. They're good enough. Robinson's return, all of that. The home court's going to be real for them in that matchup. And, it's not going to be Celtics fans completely infiltrating that building like they have some others this year. So I'm not ruling out a close series, a tough series round 2 between those two teams now. But what we've watched, all we have to go off so far is that they're not in the same class, and it could end up being an easier series than many of us expected going into the year if it does happen.
yeah, I just don't see how it changes. And as much as that third quarter run can help the Knicks mentally and from a confidence standpoint, I mean, I think some of that was also the reality of it being a 27-point lead for the Celtics at home against a team who they've made such a forceful statement and reinforced it against multiple times now. So I think that was certainly a part of that run. Again, more credit to the Knicks than anything else, but still can't deny those factors. I've been saying since December that I was really curious to see what it looked like for Boston coming out of the All-Star break. Are they going to wait until the postseason to flip the switch, which makes you as vulnerable as possible and usually doesn't work? Or is this when they're going to lock in and gear up? And they didn't even wait until out of the All-Star break because they've been playing really well going into it also. So to me, I think that the factors you mentioned, the health and fine-tuning the rotations, are more important. But I also think the time of year for what it looked like for much of December and January, combined with the anomaly of they were getting a lot of high quality looks and not making them, and the ripple effects that has, I thought that was the biggest story of what it looked like when they were quote unquote struggling while still being a top 5 team in some of the most important metrics. But to me now, when you look at them dialing it up, they are reminding everyone that they are the most talented team in the NBA.
Yeah, and you'd get frustrated. There was some opposing shooting stuff going on against them too. Obviously, the historic nights everybody was having against them, the guys that they would leave open in particular, torch them in many different circumstances. So, Josh Hart going off for 25 in that game on Sunday while they played away from him would have been something that probably happens in
On
January that
brand.
for whatever reason or not isn't happening now. And, maybe it's just, regression in the mean for those kind of guys and them sticking to that game plan, because that stuff was happening a lot before, and I'd be going back and looking at it and saying, like, they're just ignoring these guys. What the hell? And now
Yeah, well,
it looks
Dylan Brooks
great.
is cooking.
Yeah, it looks great now because Porzingis is inside blocking 4 shots, just ignoring a guy. So, a lot of it is the result. Obviously, as Joe said, through a lot of those games, the process was there. And, I had concerns. I didn't like the way it looked in some of the losses, and especially some of those crunch time debacles. It was really ugly, and it was happening pretty consistently then. So, credit to them for getting it right. I know Derek talked about, trying to find some joy playing again. And so maybe mentally they just weren't there, trying to get to that level of, the playoffs that they were just coming out of. So there's a lot of factors at play there and a lot of stuff they've talked about that, it doesn't always sound great in the moment, but maybe turned out to be true because they look like themselves again. This game, the Philly game, those are, 2024 Celtics kind of results. So I'm back. I think that they're on track to win the championship again. And Oklahoma City, if they get there, that's that one team where you're like, ooh, that's a tough matchup for them. But they have to get out of the West. And so that's a long way away that you're looking at a team like that actually worries you, concerns you. And it's been a while since we've talked about a team like that. There is one, maybe two, if you believe in Cleveland this time around. So it's going to be a tougher road to get there. But they look more battle tested and able to turn it on and reach a level that no one else can get to, especially when the threes fall. I mean, that's when it gets ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm really just looking at the Thunder, and look, if it's an improbable run by the Lakers, then that's tremendous entertainment. But I do think we'd be deprived if it's not Celtics Thunder. I mean, those are clearly the top 2 teams in the NBA this season, with all due respect to the Cavs. Shifting gears, Bob, the docuseries premiere of Celtic City. You did a great job with the questions that you asked people, ranging from Jaylen Brown to Wick Grossbeck. Everyone can check those out over at CLNS Media's platforms. They're well worth your time. How was that experience overall being at the premiere?
It was great. I didn't expect them all to be there. I didn't know who was going to be there. So seeing them all and, Max being there and Wick and Joe, was star of the carpet, of course. There was a lot more access than I expected, just being able to chat with those guys. And they're all in a great mood. Even Sam Hauser, who we haven't talked to much this year, seemed really happy to be there. And the documentary was cool. I caught about 20 minutes of it before I went out to another event. But there's just great drama to it, great highlights. The interviews are interesting too. I know I was talking to Max the other day about something Robert Parrish said in there in the episode we watched. So there's some new stuff, and that's what I wondered. I talked to one of the guys who was one of the producers with it there, and I was like, everyone knows the Celtics history story at this point. It's been told a million times. Like, what could be new about this? And, he stressed that there's this stuff people haven't talked about, this stuff people didn't know that's going to be in this thing. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't think there's as much new, like modern stuff. I don't think the Tatum Brown era, and obviously we're all super familiar with that, is a major focus of this thing. But for those who are interested in the 80s and maybe some of the down years too, like I don't know a ton about like those Patino years and the 90s and all that, beginning of Pierce's career. Like, I'm interested to see some of that stuff and see if there's some new stuff we haven't heard before. But obviously it's one of the most told stories in sports, and if they're able to do something unique and original with that, more power to them. And it looks like they got anybody you can imagine, because if you can get Larry, that's that's about as tough of a find for an interview as you can get. So the fact that he was in there, to me, I was like, all right, this is gonna be legit.
I mean, they had members of Bill Russell's and Red Auerbach's family at the premiere in Boston. And I think that speaks a lot to why Bill Simmons is really the perfect person for this, from his role in the 30 for 30s to the Vince McMahon documentary, his ability to craft a story combined with his knowledge of the Celtics, and then his relationships. He did Mr. Russell's House for NBA TV. So having those type of connections and access for someone with that knowledge of the franchise and how to make compelling, in this case, a docuseries, I think he's the ideal person you'd want to be able to, like you said, not just put an entertaining spin on the rehash stories that everyone knows, but uncover some stuff and get people to talk publicly about events and different aspects that we're not familiar with.
Yeah, and that Parrish story in particular was about the famous Larry fight against Philly there, and there was some contract disputes going on with the Celtics at the time, and obviously there was Max's eventual exit and fallout from his injury there that created a lot of drama, as they turned toward 86 there, and eventually put together the height of that run. But there was some interpersonal stuff on that team around that time that I think you're going to learn some new stuff about. So I was surprised to hear that. I know Max was surprised to hear, one of the things Parrish said in there, he hadn't heard it before. And, we're decades and decades removed from all of that stuff. So I think once people see that, it's going to be really interesting, some of the conversations that come out of it. And that's the great thing about it, because these were obviously Last Dance producers, Bobby, and that documentary obviously like captured the sporting world like none ever had before. And the biggest thing, and obviously we just wanted something to talk about back then, but there was Scotty stuff. There was Scotty Jordan stuff that hadn't been thought about, or at least discussed at length, in a long time prior to that, that people were debating and kind of still are debating to this day, in terms of like Scotty's perspective on how things went down and, how Jordan acted during those years and all that. So the fact that we're like 3-4 decades removed from this, and there's still some stuff you could probably debate and talk about coming out of it, is what makes these things so great. So is this going to get Last Dance attention? Probably not. Anyone who's probably not interested in the Celtics won't be enjoying this as much. But I think the Celtics fan base and audience is so wide, especially for those teams in the past there, that it'll at least capture their imaginations and being enjoyable for that. I think there's 9 episodes, and it's going to come out first week of March, I
Yeah,
want to
March
say.
3rd
So,
on HBO Max. So
yep,
I can't wait for
be
that.
fun.
We really needed The Last Dance at the time it came out. Thankfully, less so with
Yeah.
Celtic City, but at
Well,
the same
maybe
time,
as the Celtics season kind of winds down and it's rest mode here, we'll need something other than the games to get us by, especially if they're killing everybody like it looks like they're going to be right now. So, yeah, it's good timing in that sense.
I mean, it's definitely a nice appetizer. And then if it has the same type of ripple effects where it's not just you're enthralled while watching, but it's creating dialogue afterwards, then it could really be something that people circle back to over the summer in the basketball offseason, especially because it's not an Olympic year. So I'm very excited for this and the history of the Celtics, both seeing what we already are well versed in. And like you said there's so many narratives that haven't come out, and then the people telling them, perhaps their perspectives have changed over time, and maybe some of those people give you what they were thinking and feeling in the moment and how they look back and reflect and feel about it present day. So that's going to be really exciting. Again, that comes out March 3rd on HBO Max. Bob, we'll cap it quickly here with that 15th roster spot that remains vacant. What direction do you think the Celtics go in there?
I think there's probably 2 ways it could go. I think Peterson's probably a guy who has the lead right now, given the experience that they've gotten him at Boston at certain points. He's been around the team fairly often since that stint he had against Cleveland that I thought looked great and might have been able to flow into some regular opportunity. But the fact that they brought him back for a second year, that they gave him that chance, that he's been around the team so much leads me to believe that they've liked the development track he's been on and that you could do something like a Kada/Hauser deal where it's like the rest of the season at the very end that's going to cost next to nothing and then some non-guaranteed years after that where you can keep them if you want or go in a different direction if you want. So money-wise, I think that makes the most sense. You can keep an eye on the G League, and they've done that before with different guys in different seasons who show out, and you even have the opportunity to do some 10 days too, and they don't have the minutes for guys like that, so I would say that's less likely. You're probably going to go with more of a known commodity at that spot. JD's interesting. Everyone's intrigued there. We'll see what happens with the guard depth, but they are one injury after Springer away from being a little thin at that spot. So Brad has said, right, that we'll see what our needs are. We'll see what comes up. So I wouldn't rule out JD either because he's played so well. He's been here so long. It feels like they like him at the highest level of the front office there with Brad. So there's no room for him right now. And it feels like when he's gotten in NBA games, it's just a little too big of a leap for him, despite how dominant he's been in the G League. But if you do need some guard depth close to the postseason, he probably is the best player out of everyone on that lower level of the organization there to step up and take that next leap for him. And I'm not counting on it right now because Pritchard's been great and Holiday and White are healthy now and they have more than enough at that spot. But it is a spot on the roster that could get a little thinner if something goes the wrong direction down the stretch here. So I'd almost 90% say it's going to be Peterson or Davison for that spot. I can't imagine anyone on the outside would be able to do anything or show anything that would cause them to go in a different direction. And again, that stuff would happen at like first, second week of April, like very end of the season when it costs them the least amount of money possible. So it's not a huge topic, but I do think we're always interested to see who's going to be joining the roster next with that open spot. And last year it was Kada, right? And the year before
Yep.
that, it's Hauser, and or 2 years prior to that, it was Hauser coming up. And they like moving guys up from Maine, so Peterson, Davison would be my choice there.
Yeah, I definitely don't see it being another NBA vet a la Torrey Craig. I think that was the move on that front and addressing the 14th roster spot. When it comes to 15, the boring answer is maybe they just stand pat and do nothing. That's plenty justifiable, but I'm with you. I think Drew Peterson is.
I only think you do it because it makes one of those guys playoff eligible. Because obviously,
Correct.
if something crazy happens in the playoffs and you need a guy at the back end of your bench, you actually have to have them on the roster to make them active. So I do think they'll do it just for that reason, but it'll happen way later.
Right. And they can even navigate in a way where they make it that much more likely that Drew Peterson is back next year. It's not something I'm concerned about happening, but you can lay the groundwork now. So I wouldn't be surprised if making him playoff eligible, he's, with all due respect to JD Davison, who just reached 1,000 career assists in the G League. I believe he's one of 16 to ever accomplish that. So he's rewritten the record books in Maine. That's quite the accomplishment, 1,000 career assists. He's grown so much as a leader. Even his shooting has gotten much better. So he's putting the work and everything. Like you said, if they want another ball handler in case of injury, although I think even if someone goes down, that they're more likely to say, we're just going to put the ball in Tatum's hands more and keep the rotation kind of what it is, than to say, hey, JD Davison, you're now getting playoff minutes when it matters. So that's why, Davison, on one sense, he's earned it, and it would be such a feel-good story. But I think it's probably going to be, like you outlined there, the same type of deal where they wait until the last minute possible, and then they convert Peterson, a la Nemish Keita last season.
Yep, something would have to be horribly wrong for this to matter. So it will get done, but not for a while here. And the Craig Springer stuff worked out great looking back on it. I don't always love when you salary dump a guy, but the fact that they had a guy lined up who they loved and has shown well so far, I think is a great thing. And that you could get him in the buyout market's even better.
Can I tell you, I recognize this is a crazy thing to say to some extent. I'm already at the point, and we've barely seen him play. I would like Torrey Craig back here next year. I know that's the definition of jumping the gun, but I look at him like, man, we got to see what shakes out with the draft and everything. And I mean, but it would be nice, I think, if he ends up back here.
It was a position of need, and the fact that he fell through, and we'll see how healthy he is down the stretch and how consistent he can play. He's a little older now. It worked out well, because if they traded a second for him, you would have felt good about that. And the fact that he fell through and already gave you a little something, in 2 games here. Usually those buyout things can go so sideways that you get nothing from that guy. And you've already gotten a little from him through 3 games, and you'll take that. And the personality looks like it's a fit. The experience is there. You're not relying on younger, unproven guys if Hauser has some injury issues. And we're not talking too much about it, but he only played 9 minutes in that game on Sunday, and feels like more nights than not they've tried to go easy on Hauser's workload. You see the ice packs on his back. You still feel like that's impacting him a little bit. That's something I feel like we've discussed a little where we haven't discussed enough this year. And the fact that they added some insurance in Craig, I think, was super important.
It's a huge part of why I was championing for them to sign Craig, why he made as much sense as any of their realistic options afforded to them. Because with Hauser, it's great to see him, I would say, look better at both ends. And certainly the shot has swung back around. But when you have an injury that is off and on, you just don't know the next time it's going to flare up and what it looks like for him in the postseason. So the buyout market, it's the most overrated thing ever. But Craig was a nice pickup and a solid addition to the Stay Ready group.
Definitely. They look good. They got what they need at this point. So now it's just about going and getting it done. And I feel pretty good about their ability to do so, because they did it. They did it a year ago. So be tougher, but they still have what it takes to get through, especially with Porzingis doing what he's doing right now, and Tatum reaching this level and his depth. And they just continue to beat the teams that they need to beat in front of them. And maybe there's 1 or 2 that can threaten them, and we don't even know that yet. So interested to see these next handful of weeks here. You get the Thunder, you get the Cavs, you get the Nuggets. A lot of different teams that you would say would be at the top of the list of teams that can threaten them a little bit. So we'll see if they pass through it, or there's some new concerns, or how healthy they are at the end of March, and go from there. I'm starting to sense the playoffs a little bit. We're at 25 games away, maybe like 6 to 8 weeks or so. So it's getting there. We're getting close-ish. I can see spring, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, spring from a weather perspective, especially here in the Northeast too. And that light at the end of the tunnel is getting brighter and brighter. The Celtics dialing it in at the right time. I cannot wait for the playoffs. Bobby Manning, thank you for being so generous with your time and joining us here on today's Celtics Rundown live stream. The floor is yours right now to go ahead and promote your social media handles and any work that you want to plug.
Yeah, Garden Report after every game on YouTube, on CLNS Media, and all our coverage is at clnsmedia.com. And you'll see me writing as well over on Celtics Blog and Boston Sports Journal every Saturday. So check it out.
Be sure to check out Bobby's work. Truly exceptional. One of the best on the beat. He's Bobby Manning. I'm Bobby Krivitsky. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Celtics Rundown. That concludes today's live stream.